Hello, my name is Brent Iverson. I'm the Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies. Tonight, I want to welcome you to the second spring talk in the Helen and Jeff Herbert Family Lecture University Family Lecture Series. I want to thank both Helen and Jeff for providing the funds for being able to bring this to you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to the entire Herbert family. I often tell people that I have the absolute best job in the world because it is my job to learn as much as I can and teach awesome students all that I can. Try and top that for a job. I've always believed that great universities like UT Austin are the very best inventions created by human beings. They are special places where people come to share ideas and learn. Students come to acquire the knowledge and critical thinking and other skills they will need to pursue their livelihoods and passions so they can lead lives of accomplishment. Scholars, the very best thinkers in the world, come as faculty from all over to learn as much as they can about their chosen field. Collectively, university students and faculty scholars bring different lived experiences, new ideas, and perspectives that are shared and considered. The result is new knowledge that benefits us all and moves the human species forward. Let's learn something together. Right now, please enter the one thing that you most appreciated about the University of Texas at Austin by hitting the Ask the Professor button. So the one thing you appreciate the most about the University of Texas at Austin. So hit that Ask the Professor button and put those in right now. I'm liking it. This is awesome. Okay, keep it coming. At the end of the lecture, I'll tell you what we all learned. Also, we will be asking your questions at the end. So if you have a question during the lecture, enter your question by hitting that same Ask the Professor button, and we'll ask as many as possible before time is up. Tonight, we are here to listen, share, and learn. As you are all aware, there is a strong difference of opinion among different members of the Longhorn community when it comes to the school song, The Eyes of Texas. As you also know, President Hartzell asked a distinguished group of individuals to look into the historical origins of the song. Tonight, we are honored to have the leader of that group, Dr. Rich Reddick. He is going to tell you about his experience running this committee and what he learned along the way. In my mind, he and his committee represent the very best of what a university is. It is a place to learn, a place where everyone's opinions, lived experiences, ideas, and perspectives can be shared and considered. Facts can be uncovered. Our intent tonight is not to convince or persuade. Our intent is to inform at many different levels. The Eyes of Texas song controversy and ultimately how it unfolds going forward will undoubtedly be a critically important part of UT Austin history and culture. We are all a part of it. We are all bringing important ideas to the discussion while we are all learning and sharing, just like we are supposed to be doing at a great university. Richard J. Reddick is a proud graduate of Department of Defense dependent schools and the former Johnston High School in East Austin. He earned his BA and Plan II Liberal Arts Honors and was named a College of Liberal Arts Distinguished Dean's Graduate in 1995 from UT. He earned master's and doctoral degrees from the Harvard Graduate School of Education in 1998 and 2007, respectively. Dr. Reddick is the inaugural Associate Dean for Equity, Community Engagement, and Outreach for the College of Education. He is also professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy, where he has served as a faculty member since 2007. Additionally, Dr. Reddick serves as the Assistant Director of the Plan II Honors Program in the College of Liberal Arts. Dr. Reddick is a faculty member by courtesy in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies, the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies, and a fellow at the Institute for Urban Policy Research and Analysis. Dr. Reddick co-chairs the Council for Racial and Ethnic Equity and Diversity, or CREED, and he serves on the Signature Course Advisory Committee. Dr. Reddick.
Dean Iverson, thank you so much for the introduction, and I apologize to our assembled folks for the length of that introduction, but I've been around for a while. I just want to say what an honor it is to be at the ULS, the undergraduate lecture series. I teach the Signature Course. I'll be teaching in the fall again, and I have missed my engagement with the UGS and ULS community, so I'm really looking forward to this. And let's get started. And the first thing to understand is like just the awkwardness of this moment, right? I'm talking to a camera where normally I'd be talking to a group of students and I could kind of see you responding and laughing at a joke or furrowing your brow in frustration. I can't see that, so I'm gonna do my very best to sort of pretend that you're in front of me. And please forgive any flaws in my makeup. I did it myself. Before I get started, I want to sort of acknowledge the moment, and in a time where we are standing in community and solidarity with our AAPI neighbors and colleagues after the tragic shootings in Atlanta last week, and of course yesterday the tragic news about the shooting in Boulder. My heart breaks for the fact that at a time when we should be really thinking about the potential and possibility about being together again because of the vaccines and hopefully the rescission of this pandemic, I'm so regretful of the fact that we have to reflect and mourn the loss of community members. And I want you all to know that the most important thing you can do is to take care of yourself. So throughout this semester, throughout these trying times, please take the time to care for yourself. Let me start, first of all, with a land acknowledgement, courtesy of our colleagues in Native American and Indigenous Studies here at UT Austin. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. Moreover, I would like to acknowledge the Alabama Coshada, Caddo, Carrizo Comecrudo, Coahutecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan Apache, Toncala, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become a part of these lands and territories in Texas. So I have to thank my colleague, Professor McConaughey, for the title of this lecture. And in true Plan 2 student nature, I was waiting to the very, very last minute to submit a title. And I was reminded of something that I read in the Dallas Morning News that Matthew McConaughey had said, this phrase, change the way that I see. And as Dean Iverson said, the goal is not for me to convince you of a perspective, far from it. And quite frankly, I'm not going to do a lot of telling you what's in the report because I resoundingly claim that as a professor in higher education, a university, our students are well worthy of the time and effort to read the report in its entirety. You don't have to do it right now. You can take your time, you get through the semester, read it over the break, that kind of thing. But I do want to present facts and information the best way I can. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that we're doing this in a very awkward and odd time. We're doing this often from a distance. We're doing it on social media. And so I'm really looking forward to the moments where we'll be able to be face to face and have conversations about this. I want to start with a thank you. Our student leaders and student athletes truly heard us when we used the slogan, "What starts here changes the world." They didn't hear what starts here changes the world and keeps us comfortable or doesn't disturb the things that we value. They heard it in its entirety, and I want to acknowledge that advocating for social change is courageous work. Marching, writing, protesting, engaging in activism is all courageous work. Regardless of how one feels personally about the Eyes of Texas, we need to respect all the various views about the song. The moment of 2020 and 2021, a moment of incredible racial, social upheaval, and as somebody who's raising 2 African-American children in this period, I understand it, and I personally feel that this is a moment of incredible, incredible passion and fear and worry. And finding one's voice in that time is commendable and amazing work. We can disagree, we can hold passionate beliefs, and we can respect one another. And I want to posit something for those people who feel that the best way to move forward is to silence dissenting perspectives, to move past this. Do you, in fact, truly embrace core beliefs of free speech? Free speech means all the speech, including the speech that you don't necessarily agree with. And so I think it's an important perspective to remember. So how did this all start? It was an email. And the email came to me, and it was like, the president wants to meet with you on Friday. And the new president, President Jay Hartzell, who I'd met a few times before, I was intrigued. What does this possibly mean? And as we sat on the sort of patio of the president's office looking over West Campus through the scaffolding and the different cranes, we were talking about this sort of issue that had consumed the campus, the Eyes of Texas. Had lots of thoughts, shared my thoughts. I didn't know he was going to ask me at the end to be on a committee, let alone chair a committee on the Eyes of Texas. But one of my immediate thoughts were my colleagues, Kate Catterall and Julia Mickenberg, with whom I taught a class a few years ago called The History and Future of Higher Education. And in many ways, that class was one of the most transformative classes I've ever been a part of. And I'll point out that that class was not a class that looked, quote unquote, successful when I looked at my course evaluations. But what I learned working with these two scholars from different disciplinary spaces, and what I learned about working through wicked problems. We asked our students to try to solve inherently challenging problems in higher education. They rose to the occasion. And I realized I was being asked the exact same thing. So humbly, I took on this role, understanding that my own teaching and research in higher education, student activism, equity issues, and history sort of put me in a position to think about this. And those of you, I want to make a quick plug for my field. Career day in high school, nobody came to you and says, I work in higher education. But higher education as a field is a fascinating place. And so most of us come to college and realize there are people around the university, outside of the professors, who make the university run. They support our students, they support our athletes, they support all the things that happen on the campus. And when you pursue a career in this space, a lot of the learning you do is case study based. You look at a situation, you analyze it, and I realized I'm living a case study. And one day in a graduate program, perhaps here at UT, there'll be a case study about the Eyes of Texas, and they will write about what Dr. Reddick did and what the other people in the committee did. And I realized at some point I have to reflect on those experiences. And so the first mission we had was to put together our team. A couple things were important for President Hartzell and I to think about. That was positionality. We couldn't have a conversation simply with people from one spectrum of the Longhorn community. We're an incredibly diverse community. We're diverse in aspects of ethnicity, race, social positions, our interests, you name it. So we wanted to have a broad sort of swath of people from those spaces. Generationally, it was important to make sure that we didn't have people who had just been at UT for the last 4 years or had been at UT 50 years ago, but a range of those experiences. And people who had been students, faculty members, administrators, band members, athletes, student government leaders, all those different positions were important. But the most important thing was an investment in the University of Texas. And by that, I mean people who care deeply about this institution. And let me do the first thing to dispel some rumors. I happened to go on social media, I probably shouldn't have done this. And people were saying, well, this committee used all of these funds, and nobody in the committee was compensated for this work. They did it because they care about the University of Texas. And their journeys to the University of Texas, either as students or alums or as student athletes, were indicative of people who cared immensely about this. So every Thursday, about 6 o'clock p.m., we would log on to Zoom and do our work. And I'll have to make a quick shout out to Andrew Vo, who was in our committee, who would call in from tomorrow because he was in Singapore. And in Singapore, 6 o'clock Thursday, our time is basically 8 o'clock their time in the morning on Friday. So that was a thing that showed the investment that people had. People called in with little babies and with partners and children walking through the Zooms occasionally, and people were traveling, would log on. So it was a really inspirational for me to see people with that kind of dedication. So what did we do? The process. How do you build a team across generations, across distance, and across time? And you're never going to meet together. I remember one of the most pivotal conversations we had is like, can we possibly get this group together and meet? We realized that social distancing and just physical distance where people were at would probably make it very complicated to do this. So there are some advantages about about this moment to be able to use Zoom and other tools to interact with each other. So that was a really important thing. So we had to build a sense of trust, interdependence, and confidence through electronic media. And I want to give a real strong shout out to our committee because people leaned into this work. We ended up spending the first parts of our meeting checking in with each other, kind of recognizing the work that we'd all been involved in. And because everybody in the committee was a dedicated citizen, oftentimes we'd spend time talking about the events of the week. And though I was talking about the fact that we met on Thursdays, I want to make it clear that this was work that went throughout the week. So even though we met on a Thursday evening for about an hour and a half most weeks, we ended up spending time during the week doing the independent scholarship and work, the reading, the research, the interviewing, and so on and so forth. So that was a really important part of our process, the fact that we had all of this time, and all of us found that even the time we spent together in the Thursdays wasn't the bulk of the time. It was the other things, the research that we did independently in our small groups. So one thing to think about is, even with a group of 25 talented people, you're not going to get all the expertise and knowledge you need to do this work well during a pandemic even. So the collective work that we did, I think we logged about 200 interviews with various members of Longhorn Nation. We pulled in outside experts in art and ethnomusicology. So artist Michael Ray Charles in the top right there. And then we have Diane Bodie and Jeannie Klein, who were the granddaughters of Louis Johnson, who was sort of the organizer and orchestrator of the Eyes of Texas with John Lang Sinclair. Those folks were really instrumental to us. I want to also mention Charles Carson, who's a professor of ethnomusicology here at the Butler School, to help us understand aspects of the work that maybe we weren't as conversant in. And very important to understand that our charge was never to adjudicate and decide whether the Eyes of Texas would remain the song or not, as Dean Iverson mentioned. But we had 4 specific charges to look into the origins of the Eyes of Texas and its history, the uses of the Eyes of Texas by the institution in official events, how it was used by students, alumni, and popular culture generally, and then finally, how do we educate the community about the Eyes of Texas itself? So with all those things being said, we still wanted to have an opportunity to hear from many people in the community, and we did that. So I told you all the good stuff, but there were some places where we had challenges and we had conflicts. And just something that you're all going to experience, and I know many of you are going through this in your first year because you're thinking about a group project you're working on and there's somebody who's not doing something or somebody who is challenging in some way. All good committee work has conflicts and challenges. There's no such thing as a perfectly smooth committee organization. The goal is not to get along, it's to move forward and together towards the truth. And that often means having our assumptions challenged. It often means having incorrect information adjudicated and addressed. It often means also reconciling. And of course, mutual respect and a willingness to speak when it would be easier to be silent. I'm not going to name names, but in their committee, we had a number of people who were expert at saying, I know it seems that we're on a certain page, but I have to make this comment about this particular part of our work. And that would often be met with a moment of silence, and then somebody saying, I agree. I'm in the same kind of situation. So the importance of being in those spaces and having the courage to say, it sounds like we're all on the same page, but I don't think we are. And that was really important to our work. And I want to thank our committee members who were willing to stop the process just to make sure that all of our perspectives had been heard and all of our concerns had been addressed. So what did we learn? Well, I told you, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to ask you to go to eyesoftexas.utexas.edu, okay? The website, which, and I have to tell you, our communications team at the University of Texas is pretty amazing. Working around the clock to the final version of the report to the executive summary to uploading all the things you see on that website. That all took place in a very rapid period and with the utmost professionalism. The report is there, all 59 pages. And something that's pretty funny is that when talking to the media, I was telling them regularly, well, it's a 100-page report. It's got 140 odd, footnotes and so on and so forth. And the report comes out, it's 59 pages. And people were like, what did you take out? And I'm like, it was 100 pages, double-spaced on Microsoft Word, formatted in a 2-column format, 59 pages. So hopefully people felt better about that. There are a number of videos that I really want you to take a look at to hear people who worked on the committee, experts, reflections, how the Eyes of Texas has been used throughout history, and of course a timeline. All good historical projects have a timeline. And if you want to see how the Eyes of Texas evolved and transformed over time, you can follow the timeline to do that. As I said earlier, it's a pandemic. Please don't feel that you need to read it all at this moment. We know, and I mentioned this earlier, in a time of incredible crisis and tension, we need to acknowledge and understand that our self-care is most important. The work is there. However, if you do want to sort of get a jump start on what to happen, I will give you sort of some, insider's baseball sort of perspective on this. If you look at the first 8 pages, which is the letter and the executive summary, and pages 54 and 56, which are the fourth charge, which is how do we educate the community about the Eyes of Texas, you'll get a sense of what this is about. But I have to urge you to take the time to read. There's a lot of nuance in the report. And even the executive summary sometimes will make a claim that when you actually read the entire report, you understand the layers and nuance of what we're communicating in the whole report. So here are some takeaways. One thing that became apparent to us is that the history of the University of Texas, the Eyes of Texas appears in 1903, 20 years after the University of Texas is founded. Essentially, the University of Texas's history can be told throughout the story of the Eyes of Texas. The state of Texas, a post-bellum Jim Crow state in the South, is also told through the Eyes of Texas. In fact, the United States history and its political history is also told through this song and its uses. As I said, the post-bellum Jim Crow origins of the Eyes of Texas are important to understand. And it's actually painful to look at some parts of this history. What I found most painful was the omission and exclusion of Black students. The very first Black student attempted to enroll in UT in 1885. And as many of you know, the Sweat versus Painter case in 1950 was when the Supreme Court decided that African Americans could be admitted in graduate programs, and our first class of undergraduate students enrolled in 1956. So part of the story completely does not have Black students in the conversation. Now, there are Black people and there are Latinos at the University of Texas in varying different roles, but students are not represented through African Americans at this time. But the Eyes of Texas is interesting because immediately after its dubious origins in a minstrel show in blackface in 1903, 2 years later, the Eyes of Texas is used as a hymn to celebrate and recognize the death of a beloved president. What was interesting about that is that the students who wrote the Eyes of Texas were surprised by that. They had written this song as a parody, as a joke. Well, I would say that they wouldn't call it a joke, but a parody of the president's famous "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You" phrase. And 2 years later, they're commemorating his life in a solemn way. The University of Texas's song becomes a protest anthem on academic freedom. In 1917, when the governor deems that the university is a place, and they call the professors educated fools and butterfly catchers. That might be still said today, but nevertheless, the students realized this was an attack on their university, and the Eyes of Texas was used to protest those efforts by a governor who was in fact impeached. How it appears as a slogan for suffrage in 1920. Texas was the first southern state to ratify the 19th Amendment, and that was interesting that the Eyes of Texas had a role in that discussion. 1966, a group of Mexican-American farm workers from South Texas, Weslaco, decide to march from Weslaco to Austin in protest and use the Eyes of Texas as their marching song. So the fact that this song had appeared so many different spaces in so many different ways, we thought was important. And quite frankly, most of us didn't know these things. I also think that the Eyes of Texas is a declaration of overcoming. And I use the word overcoming purposefully. There's a very important book called Overcoming, written by Almetrius Duren and Louise Esco. Almetrius Duren, some of you probably say, I know that name. There's a building called Duren Hall here on campus. And Almetrius Duren was the mother for many of the first generation of black students we call the precursors. And they called her Mama Duren. And in 1979, she wrote this book with Louise Esco, which chronicled the story of integration at the University of Texas. And as I think about the University of Texas and I think about the story of integration and what happened, there's a very important story that I want to talk about briefly, but I want to encourage you to do your own research and read about it as well. 1956, the first group of black students who were admitted as freshmen come to the University of Texas. In that class is a young woman named Barbara Smith Conrad. Barbara Smith Conrad is a singer from East Texas. And she comes and performs and decides to try out for the school opera, Dido and Aeneas. And when she sings, the faculty are floored. They decide that she is, without question, the strongest singer among the women, and she's cast as Dido. A white male classmate is cast as Aeneas. This information moves to the legislature, and the state representative who represents Barbara's home district makes a coy sort of point about the lack of funding the university might receive if a black woman is performing opposite a white male student. The president, Logan Wilson, then decides to tell Barbara Smith Conrad through Dean Doty, who was the dean of the music school, that she could not be in the play. Barbara obviously was heartbroken. Barbara's story from that point becomes a national story. So in 1957, there's actually a conversation happening across the country, and the New York Times is covering it, and everybody knows about this. And a very important performer, Harry Belafonte, who was sort of, I call him a mashup between Beyonce and I don't know, some other prominent performer, Bruno Mars. He did everything. He sang, he acted, he danced, he did all these different things. And he said, and he calls actually the dormitory where Barbara Smith Conrad is staying. And can you imagine your classmates calling you down to the phone and saying, Harry Belafonte's on the phone? And he said, I heard what happened at Texas, and I think it's terrible, and I want to let you know that I will pay for you to go anywhere in the world, New York City, Vienna, wherever you want to go, to actually learn the art and the craft of singing. And Barbara hears this and talks to her father and decides that I want to stay at Texas. She finishes the University of Texas, goes on to have an illustrious career as a performer, as an operatic I don't even know what her particular style of opera is. I'm not going to get it right, but opera singer, a diva. Actually, one of the roles she plays is in a TV movie about Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt. And she plays Marian Anderson. And Marian Anderson was supposed to sing at the Daughters of the American Revolution Hall in Washington, D.C., and was not allowed because she was a black woman. And so many of you might know this story, but Marian Anderson sang on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, My Country 'Tis of Thee. So that's Barbara Smith Conrad's story. In the 1980s, Barbara Smith Conrad is contacted and alerted that she has been named a distinguished alumna of the University of Texas. And that experience starts building a bridge and a connection to Barbara Smith Conrad that had not existed about her experience. And Barbara Smith Conrad becomes part of the university community and brings her expertise and her talents to the student body, helping to run workshops and contribute to the academic development of our students in the music school. There's a great documentary called When I Rise, and I'm really happy to hear that the University of Texas now has the copyright to that. So very soon you'll be able to access that, and hopefully we'll all have a chance to see it. It should be required viewing for all Texas Longhorns. Every so often I would get emails from the president's office from alumni, people in the community, interesting emails that people thought I should know about as the chair of this committee. And I got an email that came one day, and the person who sent the email was named Professor Horace Young. He was a professor in Washington State. And his email started off basically saying he wasn't a fan of the Eyes of Texas or the University of Texas. The reason is because his cousin, Barbara Smith Conrad, had experienced what she experienced at the University of Texas. But he reflected on the fact that when she was buried in the state cemetery, the Eyes of Texas was played at her burial. And I talked to Professor Young and asked him if I could share this email. He said I could. And so something he wrote in there I thought was really important. And again, make sure you understand I'm not trying to make you feel a certain way about this, but I want to convey some perspectives that may have not been put out in the public. And he said, why is the perception that the actual eyes of Texas are those of a racist overlord? Why can't those be Barbara's eyes, making us keep our promises, or Vince Young's eyes, wide and wild with delight as he ran that decisive touchdown in the Rose Bowl against USC? Even I celebrated that. While it is true that some others from the past will wax nostalgic when they hear it represent the good old days, there are those that can embrace the song as it represents the new here and now. So I want you and this is the only part of the video I'm going to have that's sort of not me talking. I want you to listen to Barbara Smith Conrad in 2000 performing the Eyes of Texas at commencement.
The eyes of Texas are upon you all the livelong day. The eyes of Texas are upon you. You cannot get away. Do not think you can escape them at night or early in the morn. The eyes of Texas are upon you till Gabriel blows his horn.
Still quite emotional to watch that for me. I had a chance to meet Barbara Smith Conrad in 2012. She passed away in 2017, and it's a real loss to our community. But there's also people in that video I thought were significant to point out. President Faulkner, Margaret C. Berry. Many of us have her book on our shelves, the UT Traditions book that talks a little bit about the Eyes of Texas history in it as well. So it was nice to see those familiar faces. So you heard me talk a little bit about the history of the Eyes of Texas. And what I often find myself talking about with groups, students, alumni, staff, and faculty is, okay, that's great. I care about the history. I don't care about the history. What are we doing next? So I think it's important for us to think about how do we foster community emerging from a pandemic and wounds from racial trauma. One of our committee members, Dr. Peniel Joseph, wrote a book about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And in his work, he talks about 1968 as a pivotal year. In a lot of ways, 2020 might resemble that year as a time of incredible loss, a time of incredible pain. And we have to sort of acknowledge that that's happened and it's happening, and people on this campus, our students, our faculty, our staff members, our alums, are witnessing and experiencing the pain in real time. I'm in that group as well. How do we build community given these realities? We haven't been face to face in quite some time. How do we do that? And then what are our individual, collective, and structural responsibilities? I think each of us have individual responsibilities about how we choose to think about the former. How will I build community? How will I be cognizant of the trauma and the wounds that we all are living with? Then secondly, our student organizations, our collectives, our groups, our community organizations. And then of course, the university itself. We all have responsibilities. Those of us who have leadership responsibilities and positions need to collectively grasp those. And then one thing that I think the last several years has done in this society, in American society, is that we have drained a lot of empathy reserves. It's hard to position yourself or understand life from another perspective, whether it be an AAPI person, an African American person, a trans person, you name the different identities and intersectional identities we all hold. How capable are we of putting ourselves in somebody else's position and understanding how they experience something that we may feel is innocuous or positive may be felt quite differently by somebody in a different situation. So how do we build that capacity for empathy? And how do we start thinking about the experiences at the University of Texas, where I think about myself as a low-income kid who was a Pell Grant recipient from East Austin, first-generation college student, coming to university and meeting people for the first time from different walks of life that I had never experienced, and realizing that those people had incredible lessons for me to learn. And conversely, I had things to share with them that they needed to understand and learn. Something for us to think about. So, a little quick overview of some recommendations from the committee. We made 40 recommendations in the report, many of which are already undertaken by other entities at the University of Texas, but these are ones I thought were particularly interesting, and of course, please read the entire report to see all of them. The first one was ensure that the actions from the committee and report are assigned to an individual with oversight and financial authority, like the Office of the President or the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. Many of us being veterans of committee work knew that recommendations would be made and they might happen, they might not, but we realized that the accountability aspect of it was important. We need to recognize the students who use their voices and actions in brave ways and who lived up to our motto of what starts here changes the world. One thing that came to our attention was just how people in social media and other spaces treated our student leaders who took positions. And again, as an alumnus of the University of Texas, I have to tell you that I am disgusted by anybody who took personal attacks at our students for taking stands and making their voices being heard. We have to always remember that respect is the cornerstone of our identity as Longhorns. To honor and contextualize Black history and the history of all historically underrepresented communities at University of Texas at Austin. One of the things about higher education that if you want to sort of be negative is saying that it's a history of exclusion, right? Racial exclusion, gender exclusion, sexual orientation exclusion, you name the different kinds of exclusion. But there's always a counter narrative where people from those communities use activism, use legislation, use their other power to find their way into higher education spaces. To develop a campaign that encourages Longhorns to lean into difficult conversations, including race, history, and talking across difference. And one of the things that I cherish about my experience at the University of Texas is talking to people who I fervently disagreed with on a political issue or on an issue of social importance. And I went to school at a time when issues like divestment and Take Back the Night were kind of the dominant conversations. And talking to people who had positions on all aspects of this, or even nuance. I think I believe this about this issue, but I'm conflicted in this space. And engaging in discussions is so important. It's such a cherished part of my experience at the University of Texas, and something I hope to inculcate and develop with my students. And then finally, following the tradition of previous presidents, and this is something interesting, each president has a orchestration of the Eyes of Texas arranged slightly differently. And you wouldn't know this unless you went to commencement exercises. And, you know, I want to believe that everybody goes to every commencement you possibly can. But if you have not, you will hear the song sound differently with different instrumentation and different orchestration. And so one of the ideas was to have special orchestration of the Eyes of Texas composed or performed by a Black musician. And so I refer everybody to pages 56 and 50 to 58 for all 40 recommendations, plus the additional ideas the committee discussed. There were things that we discussed that were not really the purview and the sort of scope of our work on the Eyes of Texas, but we still wanted to share as a committee were important considerations. So as I move to the final part of the conversation, I want you to look at these names of these members of our committee. You'll see professors, you'll see alums, you'll see student athletes, you'll see staff members, you'll see people involved in spirit organizations, you'll see academic superstars, you'll see student leaders in government, you'll see retired members of our community, you'll see people who have expertise in communications and leadership. I am incredibly indebted to their work, their dedication. Each of these people on this committee, we had a personal interaction. We talked, we argued, we had a generative space, and also our supporters and our staff members who assisted us and graduate students, Mariama, Daniel, Janet, and John, who did such great jobs making sure we could all log in and have notes from the work. All of us owe this committee an incredible debt and an incredible acknowledgement of the time they took to do this. Dean Iverson said a lot of things about the University of Texas and its greatness, and one of the greatnesses are the people here. The people who are willing to give time, energy, effort, resources towards a common goal, and that is the committee, I think. So I thank them. We are friends for life. I'm indebted to them, so the next time they call me to be on a committee, I will certainly serve. I'll be writing a lot of recommendation letters for graduate school, I believe, from our talented student leaders, which I can't wait to do. And so with that, I'm going to close the chapter or the book on this lecture and thank the Herbert family for their support of the ULS. And we'll have a dialogue. So we're just starting, so if you don't get your question answered tonight, that's okay. We'll have time for questions. And we should be looking at this report and these conversations from here on out. Not just this semester, not just this year, but all into the future. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. As a humble, first-generation college student at the University of Texas, I did not ever think that I'd be giving a lecture to University of Texas students. So thank you so much. Stay safe and healthy. Hook 'em horns.
So Dr. Reddick, thank you for showing us what kind of complex conversations can and should take place at a great university. I firmly believe this is a very special place, and your presence makes it much more special. So thank you very much. And I want to also say that I started by asserting that great universities like UT Austin are the absolute greatest invention of the human species. And I'm going to prove that to you right now, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you know what students think are the absolute best single things about UT Austin. I'm going to start with the least popular answer. It's still popular, but least popular. I'm going to work up to the most popular. The least popular answer they gave was the activities. The next, opportunities. Next, connections and relationships. Community. Professors and faculty, and to the point you just made, the number 2 most popular answer, people. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What do you think was the number 1 answer given by our students tonight as the number 1 thing they like best about the University of Texas at Austin?
Okay, so this is a pretty funny dynamic because for those of you who don't know, one of my side hustles is game shows, and I feel like I'm on a game show right now. With the questioner, Dean Iverson, I'm going to phone a friend. I'm going to use my lifeline. I'm going to say it's going to be traditions.
It's actually diversity.
All right. So I lost all my money there, but
you didn't actually.
Glad to be wrong.
Yeah, you didn't, because in fact, I think it underscores exactly what I was saying about how special this place really is. Okay, so I'm going to start off the questions. Number 1, I'm a student. I just heard this lecture. What do you think I should do next?
I think you should rest up and take a nap, first of all. Make sure you're well rested and hydrated. But then I think you should think about, what is my place? And the thing that I really resonated with the response is opportunity. And I already sort of went through my biography as a first-generation college student at the University of Texas, which means from the age of 18 onward, every day was like a new thing, like what's going to happen next. And they weren't all great things. But the one thing I think about, and I'll get emotional here because I always do, is a gentleman named Glenn Maloney. And so those of you who've been on campus might know there's a basement room in the student center in north part of campus called the Glenn Maloney Room. And I knew Glenn Maloney. And at the time when I was really struggling academically, yes, I was on probation, academic probation at UT. And I'm a professor here. Look at that. Glenn reached out to me and asked me what I wanted to get involved in, what I wanted to do. And I told him, you're very nice, but I am doing terribly academically. I probably shouldn't be involved in anything. And he told me that a sense of belonging, connection to the university was important. And I would find, and he saw in me something as a first-year student who was not doing well academically, that there was a great potential in me. And I've always remembered that, and I've always sort of taken advantage of that opportunity to remind students of that. If I see something in them that they don't see, to point it out. What can you do? What are the spheres of influence that you reside in? Is it a residence hall? Is it a group of people from your hometown, or you're forming an organization? Where's your sphere of influence? Can you work in that space? Can you build other spaces? The fact that most people said diversity is what they crave, diversity of opinions, of perspectives, of ethnicity, of races, of ability status, that's such an exciting thing. So take advantage of that. One of my mentors, Dean Whitla, his name was Dean Whitla, he was not a dean, but his name was Dean, was a researcher at Harvard. And Dean said to me, I study diversity in higher education because higher education is the one place that we seem to have at least have the pieces in place for these discussions and conversations. Unfortunately, it's not happening in K-12. It's not happening in workplaces all the time, but universities are places we have diverse populations together. So I want people to think about, I can do something today. I can reach out to somebody I've never spoken to. I can do some of my own work and learn about a culture or identity that I'm not familiar with. And once I've gotten some familiarity, start making connections to people. I had the pleasure this morning of opening up an email from the Gender and Sexuality Center. And I want to give them a shout out because I think that their community-based work that they do there, connecting the University of Texas and the Austin community, is so impactful. So we talk about AAPI, community support. There were tons of things happening in the Gender and Sexuality Center, virtual and otherwise, that talked about you can do these things. So, that whole saying, think locally, act globally, I think that's what we should be thinking about. Where is your space of influence? And it's going to change through the years. It might be the people you live next door to your freshman year, your second year in RA, right? I'm a former RA, do that job, all right? Or you're an orientation advisor, and all of a sudden you're leading an organization on campus. And then you're graduating, and then you're in a classroom teaching students, or you're working for an organization, or you're doing community-based work. Those are opportunities to build connections and sort of embrace the challenges and lean into difficult conversations. I think that's where I'd start. And then once those conversations and communities are built, then there's opportunity to build coalitions and to act.
So I've got another question coming in, and I want to remind the students, please send in your questions, hit the Ask the Professor button, and we'll get to as many as we can. Here's one that just came in. What surprised you most? What finding did you find most surprising?
I think what was surprising is sort of the transformative nature of the Eyes of Texas and how the Eyes of Texas had this life outside the university. In the 1920s, SMU goes to play West Point. And does SMU go to the West Point and play the SMU school song, whatever it is? No offense to SMU people, I don't know what the school song is. They play the Eyes of Texas. And the Eyes of Texas is defended by the SMU cheerleader who says, it's like a maverick out in the prairie. It belongs to all Texans, right? And the fact that there's constantly this tension and interest in having this song become the state song of Texas. And the University of Texas students are vehemently against this. They're like, no, it's our song. But because it symbolizes and it speaks to Texas in such a way, there are a couple songs like this. Deep in the Heart of Texas is one of them, right? But that's the thing that really surprised me, and I'm not necessarily a fan of these films, but you know, John Wayne's The Alamo or the movie Giant or Elvis Presley, you know, we're certainly dating ourselves in a certain cohort of folks, but it becomes something that's known. So you think about a lot of school songs, the Michigan school song, the Notre Dame school song, some songs have this life beyond the university. And I think I knew that before, but the ways it was used and where it shows up, there's a story told by a UT alum who was a veteran about a group of German POWs in World War II who sing the Eyes of Texas. I don't know what the context of that was or why they sang it or what that was about, but that's just like weird. And the thing that was really interesting to happen, and you know, think about research as being ongoing. And I made a comment in the media a while ago, and I said we need more research. And somebody took that to mean to say that I actually thought that we should stop. Like I didn't trust the work that we did. I'm like, no, researchers want to see more work done. And so one of the things that came up a few days ago is I got an email from somebody and they were like, did you know the story about FDR and the Dust Bowl and Eyes of Texas? I'm like, what are you talking about? And so in a Ken Burns documentary, FDR is coming to Texas during the Dust Bowl, and the world's largest band is assembled, and people are brought together to play the Eyes of Texas. And this happens a couple of times. The King and Queen of Greece are serenaded in Lubbock by the Eyes of Texas and ask for the words of the song. But this time, FDR comes out, and it's a drought, and this motley band of people play the Eyes of Texas. And that evening, as FDR is giving a speech, it starts to rain. So, you know, this was in a Ken Burns documentary that somehow we did not know about this. And so those kinds of things I think are really interesting. But again, another thing is just this history of exclusion and inclusion, right? So we can talk about these laudatory things with the Eyes of Texas, but we have to also sit with the fact that the University of Texas was not open to African Americans for almost half of its existence. That's difficult to grapple with. So it's complex. Lots of interesting trivia. I like trivia, I think it's interesting, but also the real sort of exclusion and lack of engagement with certain communities. But certainly we can talk about how that's changing today and how much further we have to go.
Picking up on the how much further we have to go, this is an important conversation about the school song. But I think it's also an important conversation about how we can bring people together who have very different points of view. This is something that needs to continue. What lessons have you learned through this process, learning about the school song, that you think can translate to people who are struggling with how they can talk about other issues that are important to them on campus, even though they know that maybe not everyone around them is going to agree?
It's a great question. And so I think about what we did as a committee, and I was talking to a colleague, my hermano, Dr. Sines, and you know, we were lamenting the fact, he was like, you know, Rich, I wish that everybody had the chance to do what we did, to sit with 25 people from very different perspectives and different generations and hash through some difficult stuff. Because the conversations, being in the moment together, hearing people talk about the Eyes of Texas and the history and how we should think about it was an incredibly powerful experience. And you're sitting with people and you know, you've heard them, you know, you've seen them say something, or you assume you have certain ways of understanding where they stand on something. And then they surprise you because that's not what they think, or their perception is more nuanced than you thought it was. And you know, to me, one thing I do in my classes, Dean Iverson, you know this because we sit in the committee together, is I start with norms. You know, what are the rules of engagement in our community, in our environment? And those norms have to be things that we agree to collectively, and we have to uphold them. And we have to also have patience with each other. Because sometimes we forget and we get impassioned and we maybe violate a norm, and we have to have the courage to be able to say, my bad, you know, I didn't, you know, live up to what we said we were going to do. Or we need new norms because this is a really important issue. But I think something that's critically important to understand is, how does this impact us personally? We're talking about issues that aren't just, you know, academic to people. They're lived lives, right? Whether it's about, you know, incarceration or social policies or social justice. These are things that are deeply embedded in our life experiences. And we want to honor the fact that people's experiences matter. I'm going to name a certain institution at 77 Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Look it up. I used to work there. And I worked with a group of folks and we talked about diversity, equity, inclusion issues. And sometimes we get to a point where people would say, well, you know, I feel this way about it, but I don't understand why people feel this way about it and why they get emotional about it. Well, they get emotional because it impacts their lives, right? You can't speak academically about issues that impact and actually mean something to you on a personal level, literally life or death. So I think we have to sort of build the capacity to understand that. And by truly building relationships of trust and concern and love with each other, then you get to know those things. You understand why some people have a perspective about incarceration or police or political movements, because it has a really personal impact for them. And that's hard sometimes, because sometimes you realize we have so many connections, but there's one thing we just have such different experiences with. That's when we need to lean in and sort of say, that's where I want to be engaged. That's what I want to learn more about. That's where I want to be humble and sort of listen and do my own research as well. We're a university, so one thing we should learn is that we shouldn't burden our colleagues with telling us all there is to know about your experience. If you share it, that's great, but we should also do some of our own research and our own work. And one of the things, Dean Iverson, I've really loved about the University of Texas is not, as a faculty member, my students teach me things every day. I go home, I tell my wife, I'm like, did you know that this is an experience that people are having? Did you know that this is happening? And it's not just TikTok and it's not just the memes, it's other things. And I find that to be the most exhilarating thing. Like, I'm still learning at a advanced age that there are things I don't understand or I haven't experienced, and I want to know more about them. And I think one thing that we often talk about at the University of Texas is curiosity, right? This is a curious group of people. And they're curious about natural sciences, and they're curious about engineering, and they're curious about education, and they're curious about each other. So let's make sure we take advantage of the opportunity to really say, you know, I don't know much about this experience or this community, and I'm going to do some of my own work on my own to not burden people with my sort of tell me all there's to know, but I'm going to do some of my own personal exploration on these issues, and then I'm going to engage with people from different perspectives and parts of life that might help me grow as a person. And again, working towards this idea of building empathy for each other. It's going to benefit us in the end, I think, ultimately.
I think that's an absolutely perfect way to end this. Thank you so much, Dr. Reddick.
Thank you, Dean Iverson. And I have to make this point to people. Dean Iverson and I go back a long ways. When I was a student at the University of Texas, I had the chance to sit in one of his classes. And you were a fairly young professor at the time. But I don't know anything about chemistry, but I was like, this is pretty interesting stuff. Before PowerPoint, he had like this really cool computer set up, and he was doing, stuff with the, different hexagons and what have you. I'm not a liberal arts major, don't know those things. So it's always a pleasure to be in company with you, and I really enjoy doing this. I'm looking forward to my undergraduate 302 class, which will happen in the fall. So I will see you then.